Okay. Sorry, I'm not very good at multitasking. Let me just. Okay. Right. Is this good?
Yeah, we can see it, Olivia.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, everyone. So today's seminar, HEHTA has taken over the whole slot. So for those of you who don't know who I am Olivia Wu, and I lead the Health Economics and Health Technology Assessment Group within the Institute of Health and Wellbeing. So what we thought we'll do today is to give you a whistle-stop tour on the research that we do at HEHTA. And also we have selected two examples of the work that we do to go into a bit more detail. So Nicola and Ryan will talk a little bit more detail about some of their work. So who are we? These are the usual suspects at HEHTA. We are a multidisciplinary team of researchers. We are health economists. We've got folks who are econometricians, folks who have expertise in medical statistics, computer science, qualitative research, pharmacists, and also medical doctors as well. So we're truly multidisciplinary. At the last count, I think there are 41 of us. And we're currently recruiting 3 new team members. So if you know anybody who's interested in joining us, or if you are interested in joining us, just drop us a note. So out of the 41 of us, we have 25 highly curious researchers who also are very sharp analytical thinkers. And alongside them are 12 very clever and hardworking PhD students. And we also have 4 professional support staff who are super resourceful and brilliant at problem solving and just really keep the engine going for the team. And this is a summary of the kind of work that we do. We have focus in methodology and also in certain contexts. So fundamentally, we are a group of methodologists. So that's what anchor our work. And in terms of methodology, we focus on evidence synthesis, economic evaluation alongside trials, decision analytical modeling and simulations, analysis of linked health data, and incorporating perspectives and experiences. We have specific focus on population health, global health and One Health, and also developer health technology assessment. These areas are not considered in isolation, and the majority of our project, if not all of our project, will cut across these areas. So our training and career development cuts across all these areas, and the support that we get in research and general administration also cuts across all these areas. We have interest in both methodological and applied research, and for us, the team science approach is very much embedded in our approach to working. In terms of how we fit with the Institute's research themes, most of the areas that we work in actually cover multiple of these themes. So this is my attempt to try and map them. So for example, evidence synthesis, most of the work will fit into solution-focused research and also understanding determinants. Our trials work are primarily solution focused, but often we use big data as well. We are now doing a lot of data-enabled trials. Decision modeling and simulation covers all 3 areas, and so do the analysis of health, linked health data, and the incorporating perspectives and patient and experiences will fit into solution focused and determinants as well. And similarly for population health, global health and One Health, and developer HTA, they can all fit into multiple areas within the Institute. So just to give you a summary of what kind of work we do, health technology assessment, what is it? And I think if I have to describe it in a nutshell, what we do is we're involved in development and evaluation of health technologies. And broadly, this is the pathway that we think about. So this is a diagram that I've taken from Kathleen, one of our team members' work, and it's about drug development. But I think this pathway is not just specific for drugs. It is specific for any interventions, complex interventions, policies, diagnostics. You can fit into this pathway. The first thing we need to think about is the decision problem. What is it that we're trying to solve? How are we adding value to what we're currently doing? How are we improving current practice? So exploring the research questions. So very obviously our qualitative work can fit into this, and our early conceptual modeling work can fit into this as well. And our early health technology assessment work very much is about helping developers, people who develop new technologies, and thinking about what is it they're trying to solve with this new technology that they're bringing onto the market. The second stage is to synthesize available evidence and potentially model based on the existing evidence. So we come in at this stage as well, and that will help us set priorities. So given what we know currently, where are the gaps and what do we need to know to fill those gaps? And after that, what we then go into is perhaps a randomized control trials or using observational data to establish comparative effectiveness. Again, we feed into that as well. And then the final stage of synthesizing again and modeling by incorporating the new data that we've generated and also maybe extrapolating beyond the clinical trial setting. So our team, the work that we do fits into all of these stages. So I think a lot of people, when they think about health economists, health technology assessment, they think about cost per quality, and it's actually much broader than that and much wider than that. So I think that I hope this is a helpful summary of what we do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on a few key areas that we have a lot of exciting activities on. I can talk about our research all day, but we don't have all day. So this is just a summary of our current portfolio at HEHTA. We've got 53 live research projects, and those projects has a total project value of over £98 million. And within this 98 million, we are funded by multiple funders, ranging from UKRI to charity to industry. The majority of the funding comes from the UKRI Living Laboratory. It's a huge grant for 38 million, and we're very much embedded within that. And it's under the heading of precision medicine. So it's to work with industry, government, and us in academia to try and accelerate new technologies to NHS. We have a lot of work from NIHR. So we've got over £34 million of research projects from NIHR. And some of them are actually led by us, by our colleagues here at HEHTA. So Emma's leading the global research group in arthritis. I lead the complex review support unit. And also we've got projects that are led, research projects that are led by HEHTA. So under evidence synthesis, we've got learning disability and weight management, and also public health research that Jim's leading on homelessness. Very recently, we were part of a consortium who got awarded a living laboratory to understand strategies to deal with climate resistance in Glasgow. So that's another living laboratory that Emma's involved in. So we have quite a wide breadth of areas that we get funding from, and the work that we're currently doing. And in terms of collaborators within the university, we collaborate across the whole institute, and many of you on the call today hopefully would have worked with us or are currently working with us. We collaborate across the whole of the college of MVLS, and we have a joint lectureship with IBAC's biodiversity now I can never remember the full name, biodiversity and
animal health and comparative medicine.
Okay, thank you very much, Keela. I do apologize. So this is a joint lectureship with Keela, being our joint lecturer. We also collaborate with the Adam Smith Business School, the engineers, and also the School of Geographical and Earth Sciences. So we are truly collaborative. So I'm just going to talk to you about a few areas. So this is, I'm going to talk about clinical trials, which is where we started a lot of our work on and still ongoing. So we have a really strong portfolio of work in clinical trials. The areas that we cover include drug treatment. So this is a study that Emma was involved in Parkinson's. We do work in cancer treatment. So this is a really, really nice trial to show that actually shorter duration of chemotherapy is non-inferior to longer duration, so minimizing treatment burden. We did work on medical devices, and we do work on surgical interventions, on diagnostics. So this is intelligent liver function testing. I think this was shortlisted for a BMJ award. And also complex and behavioral intervention. So that's another example. And we also are currently working on trials in the areas of digital health and artificial intelligence. So as a methodologist, the kind of advantage is we work across different health conditions and different clinical areas and different types of interventions. So which makes our research really dynamic and interesting. And when we do clinical trials, what we're interested in is we think about the decision question. What is the value proposition? The new thing that we're testing in a trial, where does it interrupt the current pathway? And what are we proposing this to add? We also do work on outcomes valuation, because often the clinical outcomes alone are not sufficient. We might be interested in patient-reported outcomes, and what they should be and how they ought to be measured and valued are really important. We might do work on conceptual modeling, even before the trial. So early modeling, and also we might do value of information to understand whether further research and acquiring perfect information is actually worthwhile. Can we actually make a decision now? Do we actually need to invest in a large trial to understand, to answer the question? And we also use conceptual modeling to guide how we analyze trial data. So that's much of the work done by Nicola, who's going to talk about her work a little bit later. And beyond the trial, we often do extrapolations. We go beyond the trial period, and we're interested in outcomes beyond quality adjusted life years as well. And we also incorporate qualitative research. So Evie is leading our qualitative research and incorporating process evaluation and understanding implementation in clinical trials. And also, and in addition, we might also be interested in the value of implementation. So when we get involved in clinical trials, there are a lot of different components that we can add to the study itself. And in terms of the analysis of linked data and population health area, we have a huge amount of work ongoing as well. So Jim Lucy is leading this area. There's a lot of evaluation using natural experiment approaches. So in drink driving, in looking at the legislation for reducing drink driving limits, minimum pricing effect on alcohol-related prescribing, prescribing for alcohol use disorders in Scotland, and also COVID-related work on looking at policies for managing licensed premises and ambulance call-outs in Scotland, and also smoke-free prison policy in Scotland is a piece of work that we've recently completed. We also use linked data to test hypotheses. So work that's led by Claudia, looking at the use of direct oral anticoagulants in patients with atrial fibrillation, looking at care homes data alongside other linked health data to explore the trajectory and predictors of care home admissions and hospitalizations. We have a PhD student, Toon, who's looking at the impact of stroke rehabilitation using big data, big linked data from Thailand. And we've got Hanin, our other PhD students, looking at disinvestment in health technologies in in Scotland and also in Indonesia, using routine data. And under this heading, we also have policy models, development of policy models in the areas of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And there's also quite a lot of methodological work, in particular looking at missing data and different types of modelings, using different types of modelling under this heading. Evidence synthesis is my area of interest, and so I lead the work under this heading. And what we're particularly interested in at HEHTA is looking at complex reviews and complex methodologies. We're currently doing work on network meta-analysis with individual participant data. We're interested in indirect treatment comparisons using trial and observational data, using methodologies such as simulated treatment characteristics, match adjusted indirect comparisons. So it's when you have when you're trying to simulate a study characteristics to match the other, making those adjustments to predict the treatment effect, if you like. We're also interested in meta-analysis of complex interventions at component levels. So not just a lifestyle intervention, if you like, but what about the components within a lifestyle intervention? There could be educational elements, there could be exercise, there could be dietary recommendations. So we're interested in dissecting complex interventions and understanding the effects of the components. Evie's also leading a lot of work on relay synthesis and meta-ethnography. And under the evidence synthesis heading, we have the complex review support unit, which is funded by NIHR. And what we do is we provide methodological advice to complex reviews that are funded by NIHR. We also do a lot of training workshops, and we do methodological development work. And the most interesting things that we've done perhaps is the meta-analysis apps that we've created. So these are web-based apps that will help you do meta-analysis of diagnostic test accuracy reviews, network meta-analysis. So we've got links here. So if you're interested, do get in touch and go and have a play with it. And under the developer health technology assessment theme, which is led by Neil Hawkins, there's a really exciting program of work that's currently going on in collaboration with industry. So what we're doing is instead of waiting for an intervention to be fully developed and then evaluating it, we're coming in really early to support people the developers, if you like, and help them shape the areas of investment. You know, where should they be investing in if they're developing technologies, thinking about the value proposition really early on, and try and help them design studies that will support the evaluation. And there's a lot of interest in this at the moment. There's a lot of government investment in these areas to try and accelerate new technologies to give patient access earlier. So we've got methodological work looking at reliability of subgroup selection. There's the INSIGHT project that Dikshant is working on, looking at technologies for improving polyp surveillance. The Living Laboratory I've already mentioned, and Janet is currently on a knowledge transfer partnership, embedding herself within a company by providing some health economics and health technology assessment thinking early on in their product development. In the area of global health and One Health, I think our flagship study, if you like, is Emma's Global Health Research Group. So this project has recently got an extension. So I think we've got another year to go, and it's a very ambitious project looking at the prevalence, quality of life, economics, and societal impact of arthritis in Tanzania. And there are multiple aspects. They're looking at the distribution and health economic impact of arthritis and referral hospitals and community settings in Tanzania. And it's really interesting because in countries like Tanzania, the term arthritis is non-existent in the first place. So to really try and go into a community where arthritis is not a known health condition, and to try and define that and then understand the burden associated with that was really challenging. So there's a really interesting program of work that's currently being completed from this research group. And beyond that, we have a lot of large collaborations going on with our colleagues at the moment. So Eleanor's leading the global HTA theme, and we've got projects on sustainable interventions against schistosomiasis. We've got work on antimicrobial resistance, and Eleanor's also been involved in aquaculture farming and community well-being in Bangladesh. We currently have quite a few exciting new projects as well with engineers. And so there's a project on novel low-cost diagnostic tools and their impact in Africa. Giorgio and Francesco have been working on that. Quantum-powered health sensors for home use, for early detection of diseases, smart coronary stents. So that's working with our colleagues in biology and computer science as well, and also the New Living Laboratory to look at climate resilience for tackling health, social and economic inequalities. So these are some of the big collaborations that we have, and they are very exciting research that's going on at the moment. So we do all this research. What kind of influence do our work and also us as a group have on policy? So we influence NICE decisions. So a lot of our work is cited in their guidelines, but also through membership of decision-making committees for adopting drugs and diagnostics in England. So a couple of our team members sit on NICE committees. We support the Scottish Medicines Consortium. We assess company submissions and advise on recommendations on adoption of new drug treatment in Scotland. We also support the Scottish Health Technologies Group, so similar to the Scottish Medicines Consortium, they are interested in non-drug health technologies. We've also done work which are directly commissioned by the Scottish Government. So Emma and myself led the assessment and review of recommendations on relocation and refurbishments of the Monklands District General Hospital, and we also do general advisory work to HTA agencies outside the UK, in Thailand, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Brazil. So our work and our reach is also quite wide-ranging. And finally, if all that is interesting to you, here's where you can find us. We have our website here at the bottom. We have Twitter, we have an annual report newsletter, we have LinkedIn, and most recently, Dakshanta has created a HEHTA blog. So I think the second release of our blog was actually today. So if you're interested, it'll be really, go along and have a look at our blog, which will give you updates of our activities and the research that we do. So this is all I'm going to say. And I know that that was very quick and whistle-stop tour, but I just thought it was a good opportunity to give us a sense of what we do at HEHTA, because I think sometimes people don't really know the kind of breadth and depth of research that we cover at HEHTA, and so I thought I would use this opportunity to do that. Before I move on to the next speaker, are there any quick questions? I'm happy to take questions. Okay, so if I will now pass on to Nicola. So Nicola is our research associate. Nicola did our MSc in HTA in 2015, and we were delighted when we managed to convince her to stay in the team and join us. Nicola's research focuses on economic evaluation alongside clinical trials, and she has particular interest in the use of conceptual modeling to guide analysis. So Nicola's done lots of work in lots of different trials, and I think today she's going to talk about the CPIT III trial, which is Cessation and Pregnancy Initiatives trial. Nicola, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, but can you put it on presentation mode?
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Olivia. So I'm going to talk about the CPIT III trial, which is an example of a trial or work that fits into the solutions-focused research theme in IHW. And this work was led by Kathleen Boyd, who won't be here today, unfortunately. So one of the key areas in the IHW solutions-focused research team that relates to our work, and in particular this case study, is evaluating the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of interventions. So as Olivia said, a lot of us in HEHTA work on clinical trials or studies, and these can include complex interventions, particularly public health interventions. And IHW has an interest and expertise in complex interventions. For example, the recent NIHR monograph update for the framework of complex interventions includes several IHW staff as authors, and some of these authors recently ran a 5-day workshop about the framework. When conducting economic evaluations of complex interventions, as health economists, we need to collaborate with other disciplines to inform the evaluation. And this collaboration is important throughout the whole time period of the study, not just at the end. So I'm going to present an example of an economic evaluation of a complex intervention and talk about some of the challenges. First, a bit of background, smoking in pregnancy. So smoking in pregnancy is estimated to cost over £23 million annually in the UK. Prevalence of smoking in pregnancy is falling, but it remains 10% in England at birth and 13% at booking in Scotland. And we know that prevalence is higher in lower socioeconomic groups. Smoking whilst pregnant is linked to complications during pregnancy, prematurity, and low birth weight. And there's issues with smoking after birth as well, and passive smoking is linked to sudden infant death syndrome, lower respiratory diseases and asthma, and children who live in a house with a smoker are 90% more likely to smoke than those living in a non-smoking household. And there's also the social stigma of smoking whilst pregnant. In terms of effective treatments to support smoking cessation in pregnant women, last year's NICE guidance includes recommendations for this population. And these recommendations include providing vouchers for abstinence. A growing body of robust evidence shows that offering financial incentives is effective in changing behaviour. An example of this evidence is this recent BMJ paper. And research also shows that financial incentives are effective and cost effective in reducing smoking in pregnant women by encouraging women to engage with stop smoking services and to set a quit date. But offering financial incentives to encourage behaviour change is controversial. Some members of the general public think that it rewards unhealthy behaviour. And despite this evidence that financial incentives are effective and cost effective, most of the evidence comes from single centre RCT. So there's a need for evidence from a multi-site trial, which is where CPIT III comes in. So CPIT III investigated the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of adding financial incentives to usual care to improve quit rates in late pregnancy. 7 sites were involved across Scotland, Northern Ireland and England. 944 participants were recruited equally between the 2 arms. and women were recruited before 24 weeks gestation and followed up to 6 months postpartum. So the intervention was a maximum of £400 worth of financial incentives in the form of Love to Shop vouchers, plus usual care, and this was compared to usual care only. And usual care consisted of stop smoking support and nicotine replacement therapy, but there was a difference in the usual care between sites. So 4 financial vouchers were available. The first was £50, and this was given to women who engaged with the stop smoking support and set a quit date. There was an additional £50 for women who were quit at 4 weeks post-quit date, another 100 for women who were quit at 12 weeks post-quit date, and £200 for women who were quit at late pregnancy, which was 34 to 38 weeks gestation. And this last voucher was given to women whether they'd received the previous vouchers or not, if they were quit at late pregnancy. So the aim of the economic evaluation was to estimate the cost effectiveness of adding financial incentives to usual care in helping women to stop smoking during pregnancy. In economic evaluations, we assess relevant costs, including the intervention and outcomes, which is typically the quality adjusted life year or QALY, as recommended by NICE. But in complex interventions such as CPIT III, only using the QALY outcome is not always appropriate, and we need to look beyond this. So in CPIT III, we assess the cost per quitter as well as the cost per QALY for short-term analysis. And the time period of this analysis is the time spent in the trial. NICE guidance also recommends conducting economic evaluations which capture all costs and benefits of an intervention. And as we wouldn't expect the effects of smoking status or change in smoking status to be reflected in the self-reported quality of life over the short term, in addition to the short-term analysis, we carried out a lifetime analysis as well. And this allowed us to incorporate all relevant costs and benefits for the mother and the child over a lifetime using an existing model. The outcome data collected were EQ5D5L questionnaires, the QALY capture, and the quit rate, and these were both came from the trial database. Also from the trial database, we extracted the number and value of vouchers. Other resource data was collected separately, so the usual care at the different sites was collected using either bespoke Excel sheets or a local database. But 2 of the sites were unable to provide individual level data due to the COVID pandemic. And for these sites, we applied typical support, which was taken from information given by staff at the sites and applied to some information we were able to extract from the trial database. We also collected postage costs for sending the vouchers from the trial team, and we used prematurity at birth, as a proxy for neonatal stay. And just to illustrate the challenges of collecting the usual care data, which were very different between different sites. Some programs were council run, but most of them were midwife led. Some were tailored to individuals, others had a more structured approach. Some programs lasted 12 weeks, some were 8. Some specified a set number of meetings, for example, 1, 2, 4, 8, and 12 weeks post-quit. And some were more fluid, and they offered between 4 and 12 meetings. Most programs were one-to-one, but there were some group meetings as well. And finally, one site, which was set in a small community, didn't have a dedicated smoking cessation service for pregnant women. So they set one up as a result of participating in this trial, as there's a need for privacy and confidentiality, is particularly in a small community if the pregnancy is not widely known about. Moving on to the results for the primary outcome, the relative risk for quit rate at late pregnancy was 2.78. So at late pregnancy, 12% of participants were verified quit in the control arm and almost 27% in the incentives arm. There was no difference in outcome rates pre and post COVID-19. For the economic evaluation short-term results, the cost per critter was £4,400. And when compared to previous cost effectiveness trials, this is likely to be cost effective, but it is on the high side, which is probably due to including neonatal costs. The short-term cost per QALY results showed that the intervention would not be considered cost effective in the short term because it was above the current NICE threshold of £20,000 per QALY. There was a lot of uncertainty around the short-term QALY gains, which suggested that the EQ5D is insensitive to change over a short period of time in critters. And this is shown in the cost effectiveness plane, which illustrates the uncertainty. The horizontal axis represents the difference in QALYs between arms, and the difference in QALYs almost evenly split between higher QALYs in the incentive arm, which are the dots to the right of the horizontal axis, and higher QALYs in the control arm, which are dots to the left of the vertical axis. And the difference in costs, which is on the vertical axis, shows that most of the difference in costs showed that the intervention were more costly and they were above the horizontal axis. So we carried out some sensitivity analysis, and the results from these confirmed the results and the base case analysis. And just to give an illustration of the difference in usual care support between the sites, one site had usual care costs of £46 per participant during the trial, and at another site they were £309. And for the long-term results, they showed that over a lifetime the intervention was cost-saving and improved quality of life and the number of critters. So for women and children, the probability of financial incentives being cost-effective over a lifetime in this population and for this intervention was 100%. And again, we carried out sensitivity analyses, and the results of these confirmed the results, base case results. So some key points on CPIT III. CPIT III found that offering a maximum of £400 worth of vouchers alongside usual care was effective in this population across the 7 sites. The short-term economic evaluation results found a difference in the results depending on the outcome used. So we know that the difference in quit rates between arms was clearly significant, but there was no significant difference between arms in the short-term QALYs. But we would expect this, as the QALY is a generic measure and not likely to be specific enough to pick up effects of quitting smoking in such a short time frame. The long-term results found the intervention was cost-effective for mothers and children over a lifetime. Research shows that the success of financial incentives in general, not just for smoking cessation, depends on other support available in addition to the financial incentives. And this suggests that in CPIT III, the success of the intervention may vary between sites depending on the usual care offered. And this is an important factor to consider if financial incentives are implemented in practice. And finally, something that hindered our evaluation was that there's little evidence on varying the effect and incentive amounts. So answering what is the optimum voucher amount to achieve the highest quit rate, we carried out 2 sensitivity analyses to explore how varying the voucher amounts and quit rates affect the results. However, there was very little information or evidence to inform these analyses. And from the research that we found, it looks like there's a possibility that quit rates improve as the amount of incentives increase up to a certain and unknown point. However, after this point, quit rates start to decrease again. So finally, this case study of CPIT III demonstrates the challenges of conducting the cost effectiveness analysis on a complex intervention. NICE recommends using a QALY outcome, but in complex interventions, we need to go beyond that, as decisions based on a cost per QALY are not always appropriate. And that's particularly if the QALY outcome is either not sensitive enough pick up differences between the intervention and control arms over a short time period as in CPIT III, or if the intervention affects other outcomes too. This case study gives a good understanding of why in HEHTA we ask for certain data, for example, linked to the intervention or additional outcomes, and how these data inform our analysis. Finally, health economists work closely with the trial team and other disciplines to gain as much information as possible to inform our analysis. And that's particularly true in complex interventions and throughout the whole time period of the trial or study. For example, in CPIT III, we worked closely with process evaluation researchers and researchers at sites to understand and capture the usual care use. And in our recent smoking in prisons study that Olivia mentioned before, the qualitative research component of that study directly informed our economic evaluation analysis. So that's the end. And are there any questions? Claudia?
Yeah, I can ask a question. I don't know whether it's a silly question, and I don't know whether whether you know the answer. So I'm just getting my excuses in early. But I was wondering, so there seem to be quite a lot of these interventions seemingly kind of targeting the same population. So there's a Healthy Start voucher scheme, which I think Manuela was involved in analyzing. So it seems to be kind of doing various, very, very similar kind of things. It's a voucher, it's some sort of an incentive, and it's targeting pregnant women or women who just gave birth. So I was wondering whether some sort of combined evaluation of those various schemes, kind of but targeting the same population, would be something one might want to consider. But I'm not sure.
I think that there's lots of information, lots of evidence that shows their financial incentives are effective in different things. But then when you look at what the value, like I was saying, like the value is and how that works with how effective it is, there's not a lot of information. So I do think definitely scope for more research. And I think in terms of economies of scale, able to combine it with other voucher schemes would be really useful.
Thank you.
I think the difficulty with this area of research from a funder's perspective is we can't continue to fund lots of different studies using different types of incentive at different values. So it is, you know, it's quite important to try and really get to understand what is working and what's not working. But that's the typical challenge of complex interventions, isn't it? And there is also the behavioral component that is going on as well. So yeah, it is a difficult area of work. Okay, right. So shall we move on to our next speaker? So Ryan is our next speaker. So Ryan is one of our PhD students. Ryan's got a background in computer science and software engineering, and he's working with Jim Lucy, looking at using linked data or big data techniques in the area of heart failure. So Ryan's going to present his systematic review of methodological approaches in modeling. Ryan, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Looks good.
So as Olivia said, I'm Ryan. I'm a PhD student within HEHTA, and I'm going to be presenting on joint modeling of longitudinal processes and time to event outcomes in heart failure. So this is a systematic review and exemplar conducted by myself, Dr. Carly Adamson, Dr. Pardeep June from ICAMS, and Professor Jim Lucy from HEHTA. So just to give you a brief introduction into joint modeling. So it's a technique for combining two or more models, typically a longitudinal model of repeat measures For example, a linear mixed effects model, and a time to event or survival model. This is usually a Cox proportionate hazards model. So joint modeling has some advantages over the more traditional models. They allow for repeat measures from the same patients. So they also adjust for measurement error. So this could be in the measurement process itself or as a result of biological variances. So if you went to a GP and they took your blood pressure, they typically do it 2 to 3 times because you're not likely to get the same measurement for each time point. It also allows for uneven measurements. So say you have a schedule of measurements at month 1, 6, and 12, but patients turn up at month 2, 4, and 11, or one shows up month 1 and 12, and the model can account for that. And it can reduce bias with respect to treatment effect, mortality, and censoring. However, as all models, it has some disadvantages. They're computationally more complex, so they take longer to fit and they can be harder to fit, and they're not as well known. So this can make interpretation harder. Just a brief introduction on heart failure. So it's a complex clinical condition. The heart is failing to pump blood properly around the body. It's long-term with many signs and symptoms caused by structural or functional abnormalities in the heart, and it can be chronic or acute. Prognosis is typically bad for heart failure patients. So we conducted a systematic review following the PRISMA 2020 guidelines, registered it with Prospero, and we searched for major databases, Medline, Embase, Scopus, and Google Scholar. We provided a narrative synthesis. So here we have our PRISMA flowchart, and it just highlights that we have 28 included studies. And these studies started in 2014 with just one study, and then between 6 and 8, between 2017 and December 2021. The primary data from these studies mostly came from cohort studies, with 3 studies using RCT data. And for the longitudinal data type, it's mostly biomarkers, blood biomarkers. We had some functional parameters. So this included things like depression, as reported by the Patient Health Questionnaire 9 score. We also had health status. This did include quality of life, but it's reported as the Kansas City Cardiomyopathy Questionnaire overall summary score. And we also had physical activity reported by an implanted device. And we also included imaging parameters. These were from echocardiograms. But the key point here is mostly biomarkers. There's no graph on the time to event outcomes, because this was typically derived from what kind of modeling they're doing, but it's mostly a composite or all-cause mortality. So our highlights of our systematic review. So we only found 3 RCTs, or 3 studies that use RCT data. There's a star there because we found more, but they had to be excluded from the review because they only had sort of one line saying they did a joint model as a sensitivity analysis. So we couldn't extract any data on that. It's mostly biomarkers in heart failure. So we've got the key biomarkers of NT-proBNP. This is used for prognosis and diagnosis, released when there's stress on the heart. We've got other biomarkers such as carbohydrate antigen 125 and renal markers. These are all key common biomarkers in heart failure. There was a distinct lack of quality of life studies, especially when compared to cancer studies. So a lot of the cancer joint modeling studies use quality of life, but however, we only found that one study which incorporated it as part of a composite score. And the primary rationale for using joint models was use of repeat measures and to reduce bias due to censoring or mortality. So we then paired it with an exemplar because we knew we weren't going to be able to do a meta-analysis. So it's just a nicely bulk up and illustrate joint modeling of heart failure. So we produced both adjusted and unadjusted joint models. We used the DIG dataset. This is from a clinical trial from the late 90s, the effect of digoxin on mortality and morbidity in patients with heart failure. So we jointly modeled the square root of serum digoxin concentrate, SDC, and all-cause mortality using the R package JM. So we had 4 joint models. As I said before, they were adjusted and unadjusted. And the key parameters we're looking at from the output are a time-dependent parameter. So this is a hazard ratio, the hazard of all-cause mortality per 1 unit increase in square root SDC at any time point. So this is a unit parameter. And then we had a time-dependent slope parameter. So this is the hazard of all-cause mortality per 1 standard deviation increase in the slope of square root SDC. So this is looking at rate of change rather than the unit increase of SDC. So our 4 models were the completely unadjusted, which is a time-dependent parameter, adjusted, which is time-dependent, unadjusted, with just a slope, and 1 model with adjusted and both parameters. These were adjusted for clinically relevant covariates. They're listed here. And this is the output from our joint models, the survival output. Here, we're only really looking at the association parameters because the other variables or covariates are all within a 0.01 unit of each other between the models. They don't change as much. And our key point is to look at the association. So our basic unadjusted model gave quite a high hazard on the association parameter, but this was attenuated when adjusted for our clinically relevant covariates. So this is just saying in our joint model 2 that there's an association between square root of SDC and all-cause mortality, and per unit increase of square root SDC, the hazard of all-cause mortality increases by 1.77 times, and this is statistically significant. And then our other 2 joint models, unfortunately, the slopes were insignificant, statistically insignificant. And when we put both parameters in the model, they both became insignificant. We've put this down likely due to collinearity between the 2 variables. It is possible if we used one of the newer packages that we could get a significant result on the association parameter. The slope is still unlikely to be significant. So from the longitudinal side of the model, we have average trajectories of SDC by whether or not the patient was alive or dead. However, we had to scale the axis because you can't really see anything in the first graph. Each of the points is an observed measurement of SDC with the lines between them being the trajectories of that patient. And we can see that on average, SDC decreased over time. However, there is overlapping confidence, so a lack of confidence on this longitudinal sub-I model, longitudinal model for the average patient. So to illustrate what else we can do, we highlight an individual patient trajectory of square root SDC and survival probability from a randomly sampled patient. So we took a patient and then we produced some nice graphs. We've got their SDC measurements as a star, and then the red line being the trajectory of that SDC measurement, a dashed line indicating when the last known point that patient was known to be alive, and their survival probability on the right. So here we can see we've got a relatively stable profile, and they had survived up until month 12. So as a result of that, they went from about a 60% survival probability at 25 months to a 70% chance of survival. This is just highlighting the output we can produce from a joint model. We did a sensitivity analysis just briefly because I'm running out of time. I'm just going to highlight that joint model 2, when compared about the traditional models, we've got first measurement model, last measurement model, and an extended Cox with a time varying covariate. The joint model 2 performed the best with the lowest AIC, highest log likelihood, and joint discrimination index. So this index is comparable to the C index. And we also highlighted that the standard errors of the joint model were in fact higher on this association parameter than the square root SDC from all of the Cox models, suggesting that the Cox models underestimated the standard errors. So just to summarize, we just provided an overall summary of joint modeling heart failure, highlighting how the joint models can be applied, what output and reasoning are behind the joint models in heart failure. The key points are we showed that joint models can increase efficiency and they can be applied to older clinical trials, and joint modeling in heart failure is becoming more widely adopted. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Ryan. I think I spoke for too long and we're running out of time. Are there any questions?
I thought it was very good. I hope you picked up our article on NT-proBNP with joint frailty modeling. Jufeng Zhang, I think, was the first author. So yeah, I think that this is intuitive. I think if you actually explain this to clinicians, I think this is intuitive, and their complaint about a lot of prognostic modeling is that you make a measurement one point in time and then it's set in stone, whereas we know that risk varies over time. So I think you know, this approach is actually much more natural and much closer to what we actually do in the clinic, but more difficult to explain, as you say.
Thank you. Yes, that leads on to the other part of my PhD, where I am exploring prognostic models, and I'm developing a Shiny app, so an application to illustrate how this can be translated to clinicians. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, it's good.
So Ryan, do you think because you've now you're currently focusing on heart failure and you've used a very specific data set to do that. Would you be able to explore this beyond heart failure and that data set? Because with modeling, it's often is horses for courses, right? And it really depends on the structure of your data, the nature of the health condition you're looking at, and there are certain sensitivities which are quite specific. So would you be able to do some exploration along those lines?
So yes, joint modeling can be applied to multiple disciplinaries. I'm only looking at heart failure because it's the one specific thing, but it has been applied to renal failure, renal studies, as well as cancer studies. So yes, it does depend on your database. As I highlighted in my review, or our review, it was mostly looking at cohort studies, but RCT data can be used for prognostic models as well, not just the association. It is quite robust, so it can be applied to multiple disciplinaries.
Yeah, we should point out that many of us who are interested in this area, it's a little bit like life on fast forward. That the event rates are enormous, and you know, when you consider that maybe 1 in 3 people on this call is going to get heart failure, and 1 in 5 is going to die from it, you know, it's the incidence is actually greater than type 2 diabetes. It's just that the prognosis is so awful that we don't have this you know, the same prevalence. So, you know, I think that it's a really good area to get into because you just have a lot of endpoints. I mean, if you're interested in sparse data, then heart failure is not the place to go. But if you're into data density in terms of events, then, you know, there's few fields where you can get results faster. So I would have thought it was good for modeling.
Okay, right. So, well, thank you very much. Thank you, John, in particular. I think you're the only non-HEHTA person on this course. Well, I think Kate was here as well, but she's gone now. So,
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, thank you, team members, for supporting this. Are there any more comments or questions before we sign off? Nope. Right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.